Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the president of the Hurley School and director of the Jacques Delors Center, Annalena.
Good morning. I'm impressed. The motto of this conference should not be Westlessness, but sleeplessness. A few hours ago, there was still a futsal tournament going on. There was still a lot of activity here, and now the room is again packed. Welcome to this morning. It's my honor to moderate the first panel, Eurovision Contest, a Europe that protects. We will then have a second panel later on, hosted by my good friend Natalie Tocci, about second part of the Eurovision Contest, a Europe that projects. So we will first have an inward-looking perspective and then an outward-looking perspective. We have a stellar panel this morning, several heads of state, several future heads of state, and I'm delighted that I can now start and give the floor to the Prime Minister of the Republic of Croatia. Croatia currently holds the EU presidency, as you know, with two very important summits ahead. One is the discussion of the multi-annual financial framework of the European Union. The other one is the West Balkan Summit in Zagreb, taking place a few weeks from now. And I'm now grateful to give you, Prime Minister, the floor for an introductory address. I will lead you through the program. Then we have a second very important speaker, the President of the Slovak Republic, and then we will go to the panel. Mr. Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Good morning, dear President Čaputová, dear Prime Minister Orban, Vice Presidents of the Commission, Madame Jourová, Mr. Schinas, dear Minister President Laschet, my former colleague also from the European Parliament. It's a good way to go back to the national politics, it's new tendency. Madame Baerbock, Mr. Andrej, thank you for this introduction. I never felt we are already at the stellar level, but now this is the first time during the Croatian presidency that we went to the stellar orbit. Ambassador Ischinger, Chairman of the Munich Security Conference, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to address you on behalf of Croatia for the first time ever at the helm of the Council Presidency of the European Union here at the Europe Day of the Munich Security Conference, and to share a few thoughts on today's topic, which is Europe that protects. At the outset, I would like to say that it is easy for us to address this topic since four main blocks of the Croatian presidency priorities are Europe that develops, Europe that connects, Europe that protects, and Europe that is influential globally. So you have exactly pointed to one of our priorities in the implementation of the activities of this first 6 months of 2020 before Germany takes over this important role. It is no coincidence that this topic is high on the agenda of the Munich Security Conference, but also of our presidency. I think it is a reflection of our citizens' expectations that Europe protects them and makes them feel safe. In the last couple of years, particularly referring to 2015 and 16, the European Union was confronted with an unprecedented migration and asylum crisis, which left so far unwitnessed ramifications to the political landscapes of our states and on the political mood in Europe generally. It is a serious challenge that we must not underestimate for a moment. It comes from terrorist attacks and increased foreign interference. Diverging views hampered our ability to meet our citizens' expectations. Looking ahead, I believe we need to remind ourselves of our common objective, making our citizens feel safe, and rebuild consensus on how to achieve it. As we do so, we must stay true to our values and principles that our union has been built upon. This is the way forward for the European Union to be a step ahead of others in facing and preempting traditional and new security threats. One of the concrete measures that the Croatian presidency is working on are the strategic guidelines in the area of freedom, security and justice, in accordance with the European Union's strategic agenda, which we adopted in June for the period of 2019-2024 at the European Council. The guidelines, which we hope to have endorsed by the European Council in March, will have four main building blocks: the rule of law, mutual trust, the integrity of our territory, mastering new technologies and artificial intelligence. The rule of law is a key bedrock of our common values. Democracy, fundamental rights, and the rule of law are interlinked and mutually reinforcing to the point that one cannot exist without the other. Ensuring rule of law as the cornerstone of our union requires constant and joint effort by all institutions and all member states. It also calls for patience and prudence. Article 7 procedure is an important element in the equation, but should not be treated as panacea. Its essence should be solving problems or shortcomings in the most productive way. It should be used primarily as prevention tool and in a way that will not cause fractures and divisions among us. The most effective approach is often not the quickest, but one that is built on mutual trust, understanding and genuine cooperation. This in turn will strengthen mutual trust, which also depends on proper application of EU legislation, which, with due respect for the different legal systems and traditions of our member states. We also need a critical examination of existing legislation to improve its quality and consistency. New legislative initiatives affecting national legal frameworks should be screened through impact assessments, demonstrating a clear added value. The third building block of the guidelines is the integrity of our territory. Control over who enters and travels in the European Union and the Schengen area, including migrants and asylum seekers, will additionally increase trust between member states. What EU policies should be on border checks, asylum and immigration is well defined in the treaties and has been widely debated over the last 5 years. At the same time, much has been done to address difficult situations in member states most affected by disproportionate migratory and asylum pressure. We should learn from this experience to better deal with similar situations in the future. What we need is a more structured migration management with real-time monitoring, early warning and joint coordinated EU response to mobilize available tools, human and financial resources as needed, across EU institutions and agencies and in cooperation with member states. Because of their importance or geographical coverage, many security threats also have to be addressed at EU level, such as terrorism, cybersecurity, hybrid threats, terrorist content online, child sexual abuse, as well as the protection of our critical infrastructure of public spaces, to name just a few. A truly integrated approach to security means covering the entire security chain with enhanced operational and inter-agency cooperation between police, border guards, customs, judiciary, as well as immigration and asylum authorities. Properly implementing EU legislation on interoperability requires national and EU-level effort and is therefore an integral part of the guidelines and one of the priorities of the Croatian presidency. Of equal significance is our work on all aspects of the digital revolution and artificial intelligence that ensures the respect of fundamental rights, embodies our societal values, promotes inclusiveness, and remains compatible with our way of life. New technologies currently emerge in a loose regulatory environment, which is a concern because of potential disruptions to representative democracies. One way of addressing this issue is to encourage a preventive approach and engage in dialogue all the key stakeholders to set adequate standards. I think this should be one of the items that we will be debating in next 2 years through the Conference on the Future of Europe. These 4 building blocks which I mentioned will be further developed in strategic documents of the Commission, including the announced new Pact on Migration and Asylum. Its presentation is planned for early spring. Despite differences of opinion that exist, there is broad agreement on the Pact's objectives. Most importantly, on the necessity to streamline the operation of our asylum system, so that decisions are taken in the most efficient and expedient way in the interest of all persons involved. As Council Presidency, we will spare no effort in supporting the ambitions of the Commission. We will also cooperate with our neighbours in Southeast Europe in building up their border management, reception and asylum capacities. We will also continue to advocate for swift conclusion and effective implementation of status agreements to allow the European Border and Coast Guard Agency to support countries of Southeast Europe in protecting their borders and preventing irregular flows even before they reach the EU external border. As part of the Council Presidency, we will host a conference in Croatia in April to hear the specific needs and expectations that these countries have. Particularly, we hope to address modalities for enhanced cooperation in disrupting the business model of migrant smuggling networks. Our assistance and cooperation with Western Balkans countries goes much beyond the area of asylum and migration. Enlargement policy remains among key policies of the European Union for the benefit of the EU member states and candidate countries and potential candidates alike. As you said, it is a geostrategic investment in a stable, secure, strong, prosperous and united Europe. And therefore, Croatia will organize the EU Western Balkans Zagreb Summit on 7th May 2020 in order to strengthen their EU perspective and pave a predictable way for the future. We will also organize, in cooperation with the Council President Charles Michel, a summit on the Eastern Partnership, which will happen in June 2020. So this is a signal of the youngest member of the family that Southeast Europe and our neighbors in Eastern Europe are certainly on the agenda of the Council when Croatia has, for the first time, the honor and the chance to be doing the job of a presidency. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Prime Minister. So we've heard about the 4 priorities: a Europe that develops, a Europe that protects, a Europe that connects, and an influential Europe in the rest of the world. When we talk about integration of the European Union, there's very often this focus on the Franco-German couple, on the Western side, so to speak. The emphasis of this panel this morning, as you've realized, is really to look also into the center of the European Union and look a bit eastwards. I'm now very, very happy to welcome a very dynamic European president. The pro-Europeans among us were delighted when she got elected last June, in June 2019. She is not only the first female, but also the youngest president of Slovakia ever. Welcome with me, the president of the Slovak Republic. Welcome, President Čaputová.
Dear Ambassador Ischinger, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the theme of today's discussions is a Europe that protects. Europe that protects our citizens, but also our values. I come from a region where, judged by numbers alone, we live better than we ever have. Central Europe's economic output is growing and unemployment is down. This is a result of reforms we have carried out over the past 30 years. Yet despite these economic successes, we are hearing questions about where is Central Europe headed? Does the region really contribute to European unity? Does it really help create a Europe that protects? Increasingly, I am asked why some countries in our region focus on improving standards of living, but somehow forget about the standards of democracy. Why can we protect our economies but lack the same determination to defend our values? I have no clear answer, but it may have something to do with the fact that we grasped democracy, progress, or reforms over the past 30 years in a rather technical way. Economic growth expressed in numbers, reforms translated into a number of new institutions, a set of criteria to be fulfilled. As if we have forgotten that democracy, and may I say Europe and West as such, are mainly about the spirit of freedom, justice, tolerance, and solidarity. These are bound together by the rule of law. That democracy is about everyday respect and observance of rules, not about bypassing them. Simply put, it's about responsibility. To understand why there is so much talk about the crisis of West and Westlessness, we need to start with ourselves and answer these questions. Who are we as Europe or the West? What unites us and what threatened us? For me, the answer is clear. We are a community of values whose strength originates from our ability to live by these values and to defend them. We cannot do so without the rule of law, which in turn requires strong institutions and active citizens. But it also requires political leaders who abide by the rule of law themselves and protect it. If we, political leaders, resign on this duty and responsibility, a Europe that protects will cease to exist. Let me explain what I mean by this. I see political responsibility at three different levels. At the first level comes the responsibility to set the rules. Political leaders should help create laws that guarantee freedom, security, and stability. Central Europe is a good example. After our democratic revolutions 30 years ago, we invested a lot into building a proper justice system. Some of the components had to build anew, but it turned out to be a good thing, because today they are contemporary, flexible, and relatively progressive. Nonetheless, when it comes to the judiciary, the Visegrad Four share several challenges. These are all legacies of our communist past and could be labeled as defensive formalism of post-communist justice. Simply put, the combination of ignorance of the spirit of the law and the lack of courage. When it comes to the judiciary in Central Europe, our biggest challenge is reforming those who are still the preservers of past deformations. That is why disciplinary justice, which should ensure professionalism and moral integrity of the judges, is on the agenda not just in Poland, but elsewhere in the region. Each country has addressed the challenge differently, but we must all stick to one principle. The judiciary must always stand on two pillars: independence and personal accountability. One pillar must reinforce and not endanger the other. The second aspect of leaders' responsibility is personal or moral. Defending the rule of law means not just acting in line with the laws of the day. This can be changed through a simple majority. It implies a voluntary limitation of power through separation and check and balances. because power is by default expansive. It requires leaders who know that defending the rule of law and democracy also means self-restriction. And it also requires ability of leaders to resist the temptations of power and to foster respect for the rules. Finally, the third level of political leaders' responsibility is societal. Today, concerns about the rule of law in Europe or the West in general go far beyond the question marks about the state of the judiciary in a particular region. We are all facing the rise of populism, extremism, and irresponsible narratives that divide our societies and attack our rules and values. This is the biggest challenge we face today as the West. Political leaders have a responsibility to call out and reject all forms of extremism and radicalism, to protect minorities, to defend and express solidarity with those targeted by extremists and populists, to call out lies and manipulation wrapped in empty promises. They have a responsibility to unite, not to divide societies into us and them, East and West, North and South, city and countrysides, or elites and the people. Respect for truth is the essence of the rule of law. We must protect societies from false statements if these violate our fundamental rights. Paradoxically, today the rule of law can be undone by false narratives about the rule of law. When someone promises to bring or restore order, let us also look if they want to deliver it through authoritarian means, and whether they don't see democracy or pluralism as an obstacle to their goal. This is the challenge to the rule of law in the West, not just quality of our laws or independence of the judiciary. Political leaders have a special responsibility to promote respect for rules, to resist populism, and to avoid singling out someone just because it brings political scores. What we learn about our climate applies elsewhere too. Short-term benefits can inflict irreparable damage on future generations. This is why we must promote and protect key ingredients of a healthy democracy, independent media, and civil society. If we give up on this duty, there will be no West or Europe that protects. In our EU context, justice implies a balance between rights and obligations, benefits and commitments. Debates about a stronger link between our EU budget and the respect for shared values are therefore legitimate. The link must be appropriate and fair and based on a clear set of criteria, but it should also be guided by empathy, not to relativize principles of rule of law, but to consider different historical, societal, and legal starting points. Let me conclude by saying one thing. Europe's strength lies in our joint determination to protect freedom, democracy, and mutual respect, in our commitment to personal and political integrity, and in our shared understanding that the rule of law and the spirit of law must remain untouchable. Only then we can have a Europe that fully protects. Thank you so much.
Thank you, President. I would now like to ask the members of the panel for this discussion on stage. I will introduce them as we go along, you can come up. Prime Minister Plenković, Prime Minister Orban. We have Vice President Jourová, Annalena Baerbock, Prime Minister Laschet, and Vice President Schinas. Welcome them on stage, please. So let me start by setting the stage a little bit more, I think there are three tensions in the European Union right now. The first tension is the tension between the European approach and the national approach. The second tension is the tension between the open and the closed society. The third tension is the tension between liberal democracy and illiberal democracy. Some like to cluster these three tensions and construct a new dimension of politics, which is we move from the old left-right tension to the question about the European liberal democratic open society versus the national-oriented, closed, and illiberal society. Now, all the actors here on the panel take positions in this discussion. If I had to situate them on this dimension, I would clearly shift them into the more pro-European discussion. But we don't want to simplify. The question which we ask is, can we build a Europe that protects by being these pro-European voices and by fostering European integration? And I would like now to go through the panel, give a very short individual interview situation to each of you, and then we open it up to the panel, and then we open it up to you. You know via the app that you can send questions to me. They're first filtered by teams behind, then I see them, so be careful what you're going to write, and then I will share them with the panel. Let me start with the Prime Minister of Romania, Ludovic Orban. We're delighted you're here today. You are freshly elected. You are a new actor in the European context.
Freshly elected and freshly...
I was just going to say, and you're facing a situation where snap elections might be looming relatively soon.
We will have soon elections, and this will be decisive.
Well, then,
to answer to you, very short, we have to defend our borders, but of course we don't have to keep other borders inside the European Union. Doesn't matter.
Go ahead.
Which kind of borders? Of course, to keep open the European Union, the Western Balkans, to the states from Eastern Partnership, and not only to be passive in what is happening there, but also to support all the democratic forces in these countries, because the situation is very clear. Third, of course, to defend the individual rights, the freedom of citizens in all Europe, even in the countries where the freedom could be affected. And I finish my first intervention to tell you, I cannot imagine an illiberal democracy, because, in my opinion, where is illiberalism is not democracy.
When you talk about this positioning, you take a very different stance than many of your neighboring countries, especially in the East. Now, which perspective do you see for Romania in the next years? There's the question of Schengen. There's the question of the Eurozone. Which kind of message are you going to send to your fellow citizens should the election be upcoming?
Of course, Schengen, of course, Eurozone, of course, to defend the border, because Romania is a country which defends a very long European border, and we do it with success. Our message is very clear, to respect the values, the principle, and the regulation issued at the European level, with the very important presence of each country in the decision-making process.
What is your response to those, especially in the western parts of the European Union, saying Romania is not ready? You fought your election last November aggressively on the corruption discussion. The question about protecting borders is of key importance. Are you ready to join the Eurozone? Are you ready to join Schengen? Which kind of signal do you send to these people asking that question?
We are ready to be integrated in Schengen zone. I'm very sure. And with respect of the technical condition, Romania is a democratic country. Romania is a country very pro-European and a country which showed in the last more than 10 years that is a European actor. And regarding corruption, I have to emphasize that on my point of view, our main objective is to put an end to mechanisms of cooperation and verification, not only changing the image, but changing the situation in Romania. And we are strongly devoted to a process of respecting the second article of the European Treaty regarding rule of law, assuring an independence of justice, and practically to help to reduce the corruption, the process which started a long time ago.
Thank you so much. Let me turn to Vice President Jourová and bring you into the discussion. Now, the European Commission is still relatively fresh, but you are an experienced commissioner. You served in the previous commission. One of your key areas of expertise will be to contribute to this conference on the future of Europe. And if that conference was be called, it's obviously because we have those tensions I started out with and which were also just raised. Now, perhaps you could briefly tell us what you see as the prime role of this conference, and then we'll follow up and ask a little bit about this role of democracy, which is at the core of what you're doing. Vice President.
Thank you very much. Good morning. If I look fresh, it's the first good news for me today. Well, yes, the Commission is fresh, is ready to deal with big things. And in fact, to continue what the previous Commission tried to do, because our slogan was to be big on big things. And we have several really big things on our table, and we want to discuss these big things with the people. And we tried to have an open dialogue with the citizens. Remember the White Book on the future of Europe? There was a clear message from the people that they do not want to reduce the EU only for the single market, the single market without the values. And for my current job, this is a very important message. And we would like to use this conference on the future of Europe to work in two strands. One is the strand of work which I am responsible for, which is to look into the European electoral system and to make it more democratic and more transparent. If you remember, the European elections were a good surprise as for the turnout. We had more than 50% of people electing, but we also took the lesson from Brexit, when we heard that European Union is not transparent, democratic, understandable enough. And that's why I am sure that we should look into the way we vote, the people for the European institutions who, let's face it, have very big influence on the lives of the EU citizens. The second strand of work will be the debate about big themes, the big things, the things we are debating today, how to be more sovereign and more strong towards the rest of the world, how to manage the digital transformation, how to manage the green transformation, how to uphold the values, which we heard so many strong messages already from Mr. Plenković and Madam Čaputová here. So rule of law, democracy, freedoms. We will discuss about the security. And the conference on the future of Europe, it's a little bit discouraging title. We want to invite the widest possible debate on something which is called conference. So we will have to think about how to do it better. We want to create the digital tool for easy two-way communication with the citizens. We want to involve as much as possible national parliaments to the debate. And all that should be finished by spring 2022 to be ready for either the reform of the electoral system, or making only some cosmetic changes. God knows whether we will have courage to open the Lisbon Treaty. It is not sure now. But at the same time, we would like to work responsibly with the answers we receive from the citizens.
I mean, there was a lot of corridor talk here in Munich about this conference, because people ask, what is it going to be? And you have explained it. Now, if I had to react directly, I would say, wow, this is a Herculean task. I mean, bringing in the national parliaments, discussing all these issues in the current context of confrontation. Aren't you afraid that one of 2 or 3 risks materializes? One risk is that this is taken over by the Eurosceptics and that they will actually run the show. A second risk could be that you don't deliver. And a third risk could be that at the end you do deliver, but it's not implemented. There was an exercise called the Convention on the Future of Europe a few years ago, which ultimately led to the Lisbon Treaty, but was not considered that big success it was meant to be, that moment of uniting Europe. Aren't you afraid this could go wrong?
This is a big task ahead of us, and I am very much aware, and I'm not alone, who is absolutely convinced that we have to do this right. And I am, maybe surprisingly, not so much afraid of the reaction of Eurosceptics or of abuse of this big idea, let's talk about Europe with the widest possible audience. Also, I expect this will be the subject of attacks by disinformation and all that we face at this moment, which is also my big topic. So I am not so much afraid of this. I am afraid of how to say, disappointing the people, that it's just another artificial attempt to show that we listen. We really want to listen. And not only listen, we want to work responsibly and in a transparent manner with the answers. That's why I mentioned before that it has to be two-way communication. And when we opened the presidency in Zagreb, Mr. Prime Minister Plenković said that we live in the era of impatience. People are impatient. They want us to give solutions. And I think that it should be our ambition to involve the people to take part in creating the solutions. Otherwise, it's just a top-down exercise. We cannot afford it. We have to do this right.
Thank you. There is a country at the heart of Europe which was described by its federal president here in Munich at the very opening in the following ways. Federal President Steinmeier said, there should be no rapid heart beating at the center of Europe, referring to Germany. Now we have two German politicians here who are part of this discussion about how Germany could better contribute to European integration. I will start with the opposition politician and then move to someone who belongs to the camp of government but is not yet at federal governmental level. I would like to start with Annalena Baerbock, who is chairperson of the Green Party, together with Robert Habeck since January 2018. She has been a very active member of parliament, taking position on the European Union and on European matters. In very simple terms, Frau Baerbock, what can Germany do differently to help lead this conference for the future of Europe to success and make sure that we get this integration at the core of Europe?
Good morning to everybody. To put it in a nutshell, engage with passion. I found it very important what the President just said in her speech, that rule of law, that democracy, that the values Europe stand for, they don't fall from sky and then they are there or they are not there. But we have to fight for them every day as citizens, but also as politicians and as leaders. And I see, and especially saw in the past, that this fight for the values, the fight for passion with courage, wasn't really there. Everybody did this own battle for good sense of reasons, because in different national states we had the populist tensions and everybody was looking, so what do I have to do for my own country to keep it together? But as long as we don't have this common fight for the rule of law on the European level, I think we won't move forward. And in this regard, I think it was important that you mentioned that we had a convention on the future of Europe already, once in time, in a different situation, a very positive situation. We really have to remember what went wrong afterwards. And I think, because you said, I fear what happens to the people, that they are disappointed. I was there as a young student and academic at this convention, taking part in the discussions. And we were on the stage of describing a new constitution for Europe. But what happened then? We forgot that Europe is not, in Brussels, big institution. I'm totally passionate about this. But beside this new convention and the debate was a discussion of the new directive of general services. And we had the big debate in France those days about the constitution, about social cohesion. And I truly believe before the Euro crisis, before the refugee question, there was a crisis which we didn't really feel, that people didn't trust anymore, that this, what is important for people, social life in your hometown, in your region, social cohesion, that this wasn't really set up in this constitution. So to bring it back 15 years later to now, if we do this dialogue, we have to make clear that a Europe which connects, which a Europe which stands in solidarity, needs a home base for everybody, meaning investment into good schools, in infrastructure, digital, but also mobility infrastructure on the ground. If you want to go outside, you need a same home. And this means now for Germany, because you asked for what can we do as politicians, well, we have to invest in Europe, in the European budget, in this infrastructure, in the future of Europe, securing a safe home with social services on the ground, and then fighting for more common European policy, be it foreign policy or be it common defense policy on the European level. And there we have to invest in solidarity and not just looking at national budget and what does it mean to my hometown.
But let me push you a little bit. When you negotiated the Jamaica coalition, the negotiations eventually collapsed. The chapter on Europe was relatively weak of what was seen afterwards. So it's not that you made this major push. Are you ready next time? I mean, there's a high probability that you will be part of the next government as the Greens. Are you ready to say, look, Germany can go into a deficit, not only to finance the European budget, but also in order to get German infrastructure built up. There's a lot of, it's not a lot of spillover, but there is spillover to other countries that would actually pull the European growth trajectory upwards. Are you ready to discuss in Germany the issue of migration that is still on the table? Are you ready to really take that pro-European stance? Perhaps you could say a few more specific words about that.
Well, one easy word, yes, definitely. And this is a passion also which have been talked about before. I think we shouldn't be afraid for clear answers. To say, I'm not sure if I would raise the budget, yes or no. I mean, why should people follow if the leaders are not sure where they want to go? Nobody will follow. So yes, we have to take a clear stance there. I mean, we are at an international conference, so I don't want to go into details from coalition talks between conservative liberals, and this was what Mr. Andrej was mentioning here. Yes, the EU chapter was very weak, and this was a problem. And the consequence, because I can speak only for the German Greens here, for my party was, towards the European election campaign, we go with a total pro-European profile. We campaigned on a higher budget with 1.3% of the GDP, and we didn't go down in the European election. I mean, my colleague can say something towards it, but in many, many towns, in many, many regions, we had the highest score. So I think, yes, we do have to invest, because the investments, I mean, this is the good thing about the Green Deal, but also the good thing, if we do it right, about connecting Europe. I mean, this is transactional connection. If we talk about grids for electricity, because we need decarbonization, this is not just a German grid. I mean, this is a grid around the Northern Sea. This is a grid between Portugal, Spain, and France, if they are ready. We also have to discuss with them with interconnectors. This is a grid because I live at the German border next to Poland. This is something we do have to do together with Eastern Europe. And this means, again, that I cannot come to a council and say, well, the budget from German perspective is this and that. If I know that my Polish neighbor, they struggle if they do the phase out in coal. So I have to bring something on the table as well, which helps the transformation, like in Poland, like in Czech Republic, or because you asked a question of migration. I have to bring something on the table which helps Italy, which helps Greece in this difficult situation, saying we know you have the hotspots at the border, and we as European, we have Germans, we have to do something about it.
Let me turn to Prime Minister Laschet, who has been Prime Minister of the largest German region, North Rhine-Westphalia, since 2017. He's CDU party chairman in North Rhine-Westphalia, deputy chairperson of the federal CDU, and as was mentioned earlier on, he was a member of the European Parliament for quite some time. Now, is Annalena Baerbock right in everything she said?
Nearly. She's in some questions right, but the question is, what is the perspective for the European Union after the Brexit? And I will precisely speak in German a bit forward. Wir stehen in der Europäischen Union jetzt vor einem Moment, wo wir bisher immer gedacht haben, was könnten wir noch europäisch lösen? Wo könnten wir noch Gemeinsamkeiten herstellen? Das war die Herangehensweise des europäischen Einigungsprozesses über Jahrzehnte. Und jetzt stehen wir in einem Moment, wo die Skepsis bei den Bürgern größer ist bei jedem Integrationsschritt, die Notwendigkeit aber größer ist als früher. In einer Welt, die bipolar wird zwischen China und den USA, wird Europa nur vorkommen, wenn sie die nationalstaatliche Betrachtungsweise überwindet und zu gemeinsamen europäischen Lösungen kommt. Und die Frage ist, wie geht man jetzt mit einer zunehmend skeptischen Bevölkerung um, wenn die Notwendigkeit von mehr Europa auf der Tagesordnung ist? Und ich glaube, das kann man an einigen Themen, deshalb stimme ich zu, die Annalena Baerbock gerade vorgetragen hat, erklären. Wenn man über innere Sicherheit spricht, ist es eine absurde Vorstellung, dass die 27 Länder alleine internationalen Terrorismus, Menschenhandel, Drogenhandel mit ihren nationalen Mitteln lösen können. Und in Deutschland dazu nochmal 16 Bundesländer, jeder für sich. Da braucht man mehr Europa, weil es zu mehr Sicherheit für die Bürger beiträgt. Wenn Sie das so erklären, sagt jeder Bürger, ja, das stimmt. Das Klimathema ist offenkundig, dass nicht an der Landesstaatsgrenze der Klimawandel aufhört, sondern dass man die Lösungen nur gemeinsam finden kann. Und da ist fast Europa zu klein und deshalb gibt es das Pariser Abkommen, was weltweit umgesetzt wird. Dann nehmen Sie die Außenpolitik. Wir brauchen hier weniger Einstimmigkeit und wir brauchen eine handlungsfähige Außenpolitik, wenn wir auf Geschehnisse im Mittleren Osten, im Nahen Osten reagieren wollen. Und wenn wir mal eine unterschiedliche Auffassung zu den Vereinigten Staaten haben sollten, was ja einmal vorkommen könnte, beispielsweise rund um das Atomabkommen mit dem Iran, beispielsweise in der Frage, wie stehen wir zum Protektionismus und zum freien Welthandel, dann wird Europa nur ernst genommen, wenn es auch da mit einer Stimme spricht und in der Lage ist, seine eigenen Interessen zu definieren. Ja zur NATO, aber wenn NATO nicht agieren will oder kann, eigene europäische Antwort. So, und ich glaube, dass da viele Menschen folgen, wenn wir sagen, wir brauchen mehr für Forschung, wir brauchen mehr bei künstlicher Intelligenz, wir brauchen mehr beim gemeinsamen Außengrenzschutz, wird das auch mehr Geld kosten. Und in der neuen finanziellen Vorausschau, die jetzt verhandelt wird Deutschland einen größeren Beitrag leisten müssen, weil die Briten herausgehen und weil neue Aufgabenstellungen dazukommen und auch Deutschland für seine Regionen in Zukunft Mittel von Europa erwartet. Das geht aber nur, wenn man bereit ist, sich da zu engagieren.
Glauben Sie, dass in Ihrer eigenen Partei für diese Position eine Mehrheit besteht?
Erst die aus?
Dass in Ihrer eigenen Partei, I should say it in English, do you think that there is a majority for this kind of position in your own party?
Yes. Ja, wir müssen. You are
I agree.
agree.
I fully agree.
Also es gibt natürlich Diskussionen in der deutschen Gesellschaft, auch in der CDU, aber diese Grundidee, die seit Adenauer und Helmut Kohl die Union getragen hat, die ist da und ich glaube, dass man dafür auch werben kann, dass man das durchsetzt. Und bisher sind alle großen Integrationsschritte mit von der Union geprägt worden. Nur wir haben in den letzten Jahren, also in der Zeit von Helmut Kohl, kamen die großen Initiativen für Europa auch aus Deutschland. Gemeinsamer Binnenmarkt, gemeinsame Währung. Und sich mal vorstellen, dass man den Deutschen erklärt hat, ich will die D-Mark aufgeben und will einen Euro schaffen. Den Mut müsste man heute bei anderen Themen mal aufbringen. Also Binnenmarkt, Währung, Abschaffung der Grenzen, Schengen, alles 80er Jahre Helmut Kohl, dann mit einem Prozess des Durchsetzens, mit Delors und Präsident Mitterrand auf der französischen Seite. Heute macht der französische Präsident Vorschläge und wir brauchen relativ lange, ehe man darauf antwortet. Und ich glaube, und der Koalitionsvertrag, nicht der Jamaika, der jetzige, ist überschrieben, mehr Dynamik für Europa. Davon hat man die letzten 2 Jahre so viel nicht gemerkt. Und insofern gibt es noch Aufgaben, jetzt mit der deutschen Ratspräsidentschaft verbunden, nach dem Austritt der Briten hier eine neue Dynamik zu erzeugen.
Vice President Schinas, let me turn to you. You have that portfolio in the European Commission that sparked some debate in the beginning, this discussion about which areas would really be covered and how they would be connected. Migration, asylum, security, union skills, education, integration. All these areas were meant to represent a Europe that would work. If you look backward and you look forward, where should Europe correct mistakes that were made in the past? Were there mistakes made in the past years? And if yes, how can we correct them?
Good morning. First of all, I feel like a colossus of Rhodes strutting between the two panels because my job involves both the Europe that protects and the Europe that projects. So maybe I stay for the next panel too, Ambassador Isic. Now, we are here for the Europe that protects side, and looking back, of course, we have to be very clear on things that Europe failed to deliver. On security, we still face fragmentation. There is fragmentation and lack of trust. Of course, in a way, this is easy to explain because the security people are born with an inherent lack of trust. So we have to bridge this lack of trust. We have to try to work together to address physical and digital threats. We have to align the level of protection between the two. We have to prepare our union for these new challenges, namely 5G and artificial intelligence. No one in Europe would like the development of algorithms to be in the hands of the engineers. We want it to be in the hands of politicians and regulators. And of course, the big challenge is to find the right balance on migration policy that combines the two basic pillars of responsibility and solidarity. You asked me what we did wrong last time. I think we were very quick to press with solidarity without making clear that the responsibility element is there. Now, as you know, we're preparing a second go with a new EU Pact for Asylum and Migration that Prime Minister Plenković referred to earlier. This will be a holistic approach, a different approach. We will start with our relations with the countries of origin and transit, where Europe spends a lot of money with development aid, but still fail to address the root causes of migration. Then we have to have a robust management of our external borders. It's unthinkable that we leave our external borders management to our frontline member states. We have to build this capacity through the new European Border and Coast Guard. And finally, we have to come up with a system of burden sharing and solidarity that goes beyond the current situation, which is unfair to the countries of first entry. where they shoulder disproportionate burden on behalf of the Union. I think this is doable. Last time we failed. We have to be very clear on that. I don't want now to open the wounds of what went wrong. I think the main difficulty was that we tried through qualified majority to decide areas that are very much linked to the national sovereignty in the way our governments and societies react to these issues. Now we're preparing the second go. Failure is not an option this time. And I want to be very clear, we will take the landing gear down only if there is a landing zone. So we are now preparing for this landing zone, and we want to make sure that whatever we present will fly. And of course, we hope, and this is probably the last point, that in this debate, we need a certain sense of, how should I put this, calmness and coolness. I think we need to have less populists claiming that there are very easy solutions to these complex problems. We have to work to make this understood, and we have to find le bon milieu, the right approach, the right equilibrium. And I think, well, Minister President Laschet, in his previous life as a member of Internal Affairs, Interior in North Rhine-Westphalia, gave this tonality of the right response to migration, as did, for example, Prime Minister Mitsotakis, who faced a neo-Nazi party that threatened the narrative. So cool, work, and soberness.
Just to reconnect the discussion about the multi-annual financial framework, what you describe in terms of needs to implement your policies is very, very large. So if you think about external border control, if you think about working with third countries, you use the word burden sharing, which is financial on the one hand, which is also who will host migrants in countries. There's a lot of financial needs behind. Do you have expectations for the MFF discussions, and do you think this can be covered for the next 7 years?
As you know, we have an extraordinary European Council next Thursday in Brussels, which is the first attempt to address the MFF quandrum. There, on the migration security front, there is one central priority, which is to implement the decision we collectively took to have a permanent standing corps for the European Border and Coast Guard. This will be the first EU agency with 10,000 permanent staff carrying guns, having EU uniforms, and having their own equipment. This is an unprecedented step in federalizing away our border management. The decision has been taken, and now we need the money. So I really hope that this fundamental element of responsibility will not be lost, will not be the victim of the discussion on the MFF on Thursday, especially because we have the rather oxymoron or antithetic that some of the governments that want us to do better border management are with the frugal front. So we cannot have it both ways. If we need border management, we need the resources to make it happen.
Let me briefly turn back to you, Prime Minister. You gave this speech, you outlined this. Now you've listened to the discussion. Are you happy with that?
With the general debate of my colleagues, very much, yes.
Yeah. Are there members or people in the European Union that you think will disagree with that approach?
Well, I think the whole debate about security and the debate that we have next week, which is the financial framework, and the issue of the burden sharing on the consequences of the migratory crisis are a cocktail which has, I would say, emancipated the divisions among the EU member states. In my view, this is the critical political problem that we have. For the first time, I felt there was really an item on the agenda of the European Council in the last 3 years when this came to a clash. You could see in the debates in the middle of the night that we were sort of grouping and cornering. So they're like clusters of prime ministers trying to understand what the others are going to say and what the response would be. So this crisis has hit, in my view, the natural pro-European reflex of most of the countries. And this is I would say, a structural problem that we need to address today. And this should be, and this is what I said to the College of the Commissioners when they were in Zagreb, when we discussed what the European Conference on the Future of Europe should be about. I think this conference should not substitute or repeat what the institutions are doing anyway. This should be really a pure political debate on what are the issues that where we do acknowledge we have a huge political problem. What are the fractures on the European continent? How can we soften those differences and how can we be more united to have a common response? I think this is the critical problem. This is, in my view, issue number one for Europe in the next couple of years.
I invite you all now to go to your apps, to send questions, or to raise your hands if you want to ask questions. I want to go with one sentence to each of you while you're preparing your questions. Actually, two answers, but really in one sentence. One is the current budget of around 1%? I mean, we don't know the exact landing zone, and President Macron yesterday came up with this metaphor saying, you know, we discussed whether it's 1.06 or 1.07. The fact is the bread gets larger and we have the same amount of butter. And even though that metaphor is not entirely correct because the GDP has also been rising, and in that sense the overall amount goes up, is 1% GDP the right amount for the spending of the European Union? What do you think? I start with you, Vice President Schinas.
No, it is not. Clearly it is not.
How much should it be?
It should be something that would maintain the level of our common ambitions, adjusting traditional areas like agriculture and cohesion to the societies we live in, but clearly making an additional effort to address the new challenges. And the new challenges is, of course, research, development, innovation and security.
Herr Ministerpräsident.
Ich denke, es ist wichtig zu definieren, welche Aufgaben nimmt man sich vor und dann zu definieren, welches Geld wird dafür benötigt. Ich glaube, das jetzige Budget reicht nicht. Aber ich würde jetzt keinen Wert sagen, wo es landen sollte. Das ist, glaube ich, Aufgabe der Verhandlungen.
Interesting.
Aber es wird mehr geben, das ist für Deutschland klar.
Frau Baerbock.
Well, we know the task. We debated them now for months and months. So yes, we need a higher budget. And if you see the task, if you have more responsibilities, we have to rise, I think, at 1.3%. So really make a step forward, because Europe cares for more, where national budgets are not so much investing anymore. Plus, I think this is very important, we have to look at the own resources of the EU, its own taxes, and we have elements there. And we have to use them there as well, looking especially at the pricing for CO2.
Vice President Jourová.
Yes, I will repeat what Margaritis said, that it is not enough, because we see that we need to do more with less money, and more means to prioritize with regard of the current needs. And when you have less money, you really have to think twice where you invest. So the principle of value for money will have to be very strong. And one more thing, you didn't ask about that, but the speed is also of the essence here, because if there will be a big delay in adoption of the budget, there will be a gap in cash flow for many, many projects in the EU. And so by having the budget delayed, we will devaluate the money which is invested now. It sounds technical, but it's a very political issue. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Prime Minister.
New objectives means new expenses, and new expenses should be financed through a growing of the percentage if we want to not affect the classical objective of European policy, cohesion, common agricultural policy, convergence, and other objectives. For us, it's necessary of growing. Of course, this should be unanimous accepted.
Prime Minister Plenković.
I think it's not enough. Very simple question. Answer.
interesting. We have a very clear agreement here that the 1% is not enough, but I take all the bets you would like to take. It's not going to be above 1.1 at the end of the day, and could even be less than that. Now, there's a very interesting question from Charles Grant, which we have indeed avoided so far. Charles, where are you? In the back. Charles, please ask your question.
None of our illustrious panelists has talked about the problem of the rule of law in many EU countries. Do they agree with the idea that some countries do, that the budget talks, the MFF talks, should reform the structural funds so that receipt of the structural funds is dependent on compliance with the rule of law? Should conditionality with the rule of law be added to the provisions for the structural funds?
That question is so central that I think we should briefly go again through the panel, and you tell me what you think. I start here. Prime Minister Plenković.
I think everybody agrees that the rule of law will be included into the legislative package when it comes to the MFF. We tend to forget that the MFF actually is more than 40 pieces of legislation. And that's why what Commissioner Jourová said, we should not be too late on reaching an agreement at the level of the heads of state and government, since there is the whole procedure that needs to be negotiated through trialogues between the Council, Parliament, and the Commission. On the rule of law, I think, first of all, I've mentioned it in my opening speech, but what we here need to be very clear. The essence is that we really understand what we will agree upon. The key concern among some of the member states is that there is no vague or loose formulation which then ex post leaves a lot of arbitrary space for saying someone has violated a certain aspect of the rule of law and thus no funds available. This is the heart of the debate which we will face. So we need to be very, very precise, no imprecision. Otherwise, everybody's in favor.
I hear a lot of nodding. Perhaps if you could also address whether it's feasible. I mean, we need a unanimous agreement. This is an institute, or will be an interinstitutional agreement. Prime Minister?
I hope will be feasible because if we don't regulate very clear, the situations could appear very many subjective decisions which could create unjust penalties for different countries, possible from other reasons than not respecting the rule of law. It's a very delicate question because here should be very clear the regulation, and is a field where it's very hard to include very clear which are the penalties for what.
Yeah. Vice President, it's part of your portfolio. So if I'm not mistaken, you're responsible for strengthening democracy and transparency and upholding European values and rights, e.g., rule of law. How do you react?
Well, may I react on the financial question?
Sorry?
On the question on the budget.
No, the question about, yeah, whether there is a linkage between the two, obviously.
Yeah,
that is key.
I really want to react on this because it was my idea, by the way,
yeah.
to come with such a conditionality between the principle of rule of law and the EU budget, but not only cohesion money. It is proposed as a conditionality which relates to the whole budget, not only cohesion money to punish, as the Prime Minister said, some specific countries. So this is, when I came with this idea, it's I think 2017, it created a very intensive wave of protest.
Oh, yes.
And I expected this to be dropped over the budgetary negotiations, and it is still there. This increasing support, because we all see that the rule of law issue is a problem which could create big problem for the whole Europe. So I hope this will be adopted, but again, not only cohesion money. The second thing, financial pressure cannot be the only measure we use to protect the rule of law in the EU. It's absolutely clear. And the third thing, it must be precise. The proposal is very precise. It contains the list of the situations which might trigger this conditionality. So no vague phrase which might be used against everybody. And the last comment, we really tried hard to create the mechanism which in the end will not punish the municipalities, the NGOs, the project applicants. So this is on the money. On the rule of law itself, well, indeed, we have to work more intensive through different strands of work. One is the legal approach. Article 7, which I never believed will ever be triggered, but it is there. We have this procedure already in case of Poland and Hungary. We have to open again the technical level dialogue with Poland, also with Hungary, to discuss the things in more depth. I was in Warsaw recently. There was I had a very good debate with the Minister of Justice, and he explained to me why they started the reform. What were the problems in Polish judiciary? Including the heritage of communism. And as a person from Czech Republic, I have understanding for that. And I explained why this is EU matter, why EU has something to say to it. And we have to open this technical debate to explain to each other where there is the line between the reform of judiciary, which we want to see in the member states to have judiciary system more efficient, better working for the people, and where is the line of breaching the independence of judiciary, which we see in Poland. The third strand of work will be the annual review on rule of law, which we will come with in September or October this year. And we will cover all the member states. This is something which Poland, Hungary, maybe Romania call for a long time. Look at all the states. Don't focus only on, sorry to say it, but usual suspects. And we will cover the constitutional balances of powers, which Madame Čaputová spoke so well about before here, that this is a very key principle. We will look into independence and efficiency of judiciary. We will cover the anti-corruption measures in each country, and we will also cover the independence of media and media pluralism and freedom of speech. So looking at all four components in all the member states will give us better picture on where we are in Europe with rule of law. Sorry, I was too long.
That's fine. It's your area. Annalena, Baerbock, Minister President Laschet, Vice President Schinas. Quickly, conditionality, yes or no?
Yes, but if I may, because I think the details are very important in politics. Yeah? If you have only headlines and everybody agrees, you do not move forward if you do not talk about the detail. So I'm very thankful to the Commissioner that she mentioned them, because I believe that there's not like common agreement anymore. So if you allow me, I would like to make 3 short remarks. First of all, almost all Democratic Party talked about in the European election campaigns about the rule of law. So we have to deliver. If we do not deliver on this point, the raised voting turnout will go down in the next step. So we do need this mechanism. Yes, we need it. I think it has to have teeth. So I totally support that it has to be connected in the proposal of the Commissioner to a financial question. Going to one of the details, for me it's essential that you do not target communities. We have so many regions and communities who do the best for the rule of law, who keep up the freedom of press and all these kind of things. So you really have to target those who are responsible on the national level if there's breach. So this would be very important for me in this regard. And I really hope it stays, because what I saw now also in the MFF, the high connection towards the financial funds is not there anymore. So it's really up to all of us in the European Parliament and the Council to bring your original proposal back on the table. And third point, and there I would also follow up what you have said. We cannot only look at some countries, because then we never get the unanimity we need here. So looking at the breach in different fields, have the screening mechanism, not only by the Council, but with an independent commission, which was also proposed by the European Parliament. And this is very important for me, we have to look, in my point of view, at treaty infringement procedures, because the rule of law is not only the biggest topics of freedom of speech. We have so many treaties. For example, in Germany, we breach more than 100 treaties of the European Union. We are with more than 100 cases in front of the European Court. So this is also a question of law if the big parties apply. So I totally agree we have to draw a bigger picture, because otherwise we have the old division again of saying there are small states and there are big states, but it has to be the same for everybody.
Very good. Herr Ministerpräsident.
Also ich glaube, ja, wir brauchen Anreizsysteme. Und das letzte Beispiel ist ja genau eines, wo man das ja schon macht. Das ist ja nichts Neues im europäischen System, dass, wenn jemand die Regeln nicht einhält, dann Zahlungen an die Europäische Union nötig sind. Das ist was Neues beim Rechtsstaatsbereich, aber ich denke, dass es hier eine Beziehung geben sollte, und es sollte sie auch geben in der Solidarität in Europa im Hinblick auf Flüchtlinge. Wir haben das erlebt, als der Verteilschlüssel beschlossen wurde. Sie haben das eben erwähnt. Das hat nicht funktioniert, weil man kann nicht mit qualifizierter Mehrheit einem Land mit einer ganz anderen Tradition es letztlich aufdrücken. Das empfindet das Land negativ und der Mechanismus funktioniert nicht. Man kann aber sagen, dass es eine gesamteuropäische Solidaritätsaufgabe ist, die Anrainer am Mittelmeer nicht alleine zu lassen, Griechenland zum Beispiel in diesen Tagen, und gleichzeitig dem, der sich der Aufnahme von Menschen entzieht, dann auch weniger Fördermittel zukommen lassen als anderen, die bereit sind, solidarisch zu sein. So etwas, finde ich, sollte in die neue Perspektive mit einbezogen werden. Wer solidarischer ist, kann das auch bei den finanziellen Leistungen, die er von der Europäischen Union bezieht, spüren.
Let me ask, I need to ask a follow-up question here. What you've just said puts you much closer to Emmanuel Macron than to Viktor Orban. Now, you belong to a political family of which Macron is not a member, but Viktor Orban is a member. Is that right?
You ask me?
Yeah.
The political families in Europe are very broad, you know. Ich war Mitglied des Europäischen Parlaments, dann kann aus einem anderen Mitgliedstaat ein Christdemokrat potenziell eher näher einem Sozialdemokraten bei uns sein oder umgekehrt. Also das ist nicht so starr wie die nationale Politik. Zu Frankreich verbindet uns zunächst mal als Deutsche ein hohes Grad an Gemeinsamkeit, egal wer gerade französischer Präsident ist. Helmut Kohl und François Mitterrand haben viel bewegt, und sie waren aus zwei völlig unterschiedlichen politischen Familien. Das ist gerade die Stärkung dieser deutsch-französischen Freundschaft, und insofern bin ich auch als Beauftragter bin ja Teil dieses deutsch-französischen Prozesses dafür, dass Deutschland und Frankreich mehr enger macht, Europa voranbringt. Der Aachener Vertrag ist ein Beispiel dafür, aber es muss offen sein für alle anderen. Und auch das war immer, Deutschland und Frankreich waren immer stärker, wenn sie auch die kleineren Länder mit einbezogen haben, wenn sie ihre Aktivitäten für mehr Europa geöffnet haben, auch für die anderen Partner. Und wer dann da herzlich eingeladen.
Vice President Schinas, the conditionality question, and then we continue.
On the rule of law, I think there was a temptation in certain quarters to think that there is one magic bullet that sorts everything out. So we lost a lot of time and energy around Article 7. And I think the right response in the area of rule of law is to create a rule of law ecosystem that forces the liberal tendencies, if you like, to see more incentives in the ecosystem rather than out of it. What will be in this ecosystem? First of all, infringements. That's where the Commission can be very helpful, tangible, and specific. We address everything that hits community law with the force of community law. And I think this is a track that is working. A second, of course, planet of this galaxy would be certainly the conditionality, but clever conditionality, not indiscriminate one. And the third, and equally important, is to answer back, to defend, to explain. I was a chief spokesman of the Commission for the last 5 years. I took hell from these quarters. I saw my name in billboards, in the dark internet, projected as the man of this, as the man of that. But at some point, we have to answer back, and we have to do it with the force of our arguments and the force of our values. And I think it's happening. I mean, I'm not entirely pessimistic on the way the rule of law debate develops, and my colleague Věra Jourová will be the one who will do the job now.
There's a Munich young leader who had a question that was sent electronically. That person is not in the room. I'll take your question first and then go back, please. Do you have a mic?
Thank you very much. Professor Katarzyna Pisarska, I'm the founder and director of the European Academy of Diplomacy in Warsaw, Poland. I wanted to ask you about yesterday's speech of Secretary Pompeo. He has mentioned that the US Congress has agreed for a $1 billion fund for the Free Seas initiative that started between Poland and Croatia and now consists of all Central European countries. This is an initiative that concerns mainly building energy, but also other infrastructure. And it is the first time the United States has decided to commit. What is your impression on this American commitment? How do you see the Free Seas initiative? Do you see it as a potential competition to what the European Union is doing or not? On the contrary, is there any fears regarding this specific development? Thank you.
Very good. We have a question in the back here. Please, over there.
It's okay? Go. Paolo Valentino, Corriere della Sera. I have a question for Minister President Laschet. I'm not going to ask you whether or not you'll run for the presidency of your party. But in your expose, you correctly described how Germany in the 80s provided leadership and proposals for the advancement of Europe. And then you said quite adamantly that Germany must deliver in terms of providing leadership and new proposals in the coming presidency of the European Union. Now, if I may say, this sounds like a criticism of Angela Merkel, who in the last 2 years remained basically silent in front of the President Macron proposals. So is that correct as an impression? And second, why should be any different from July to December under the same chancellor from what has been the last 2 years, in which Germany basically didn't go along in pushing for more integration and more reform for Europe? Thank you.
There's a third question over there, and then we go back to the panel.
Thank you very much. Claudia Gamon, member of the European Parliament and a Munich young leader. I want to thank the moderator for bringing up the conference on the future of Europe because it has a lot of potential to solve many of the issues that have been raised on this panel. However, many speakers in the past 2 days have mentioned that they fear that European institutions are not up to the challenge to react in the speed that is necessary nowadays. And many people have raised issues that are due to just how the European Union works, how the institutions work, how the treaty works. Are you ready to talk about the potential of treaty change, and not in a very long future, but in a near future, and how much more time can we actually afford to take to start talking about the elephant in the room, which is a change of the treaties?
Wow, that's a menu. We start in the middle this time. Vice President Jourová. Briefly, you pick your question, and then we go to the others.
So may I pick the last one?
Well, you pick what you want to pick.
Yes. I think that we showed that we can react very quickly. I am I wanted to say perpetrator. I am in criminal justice for a long time, but I am one of the co-authors of the Code of Conduct we came with in spring 2016. We needed immediate solution for rising hate speech online. And the agreement was very quick with the big tech companies. And it was under heavy criticism that what kind of solution and decision it is, but we needed to act to protect the people. But when it comes to legislation, I am quite grateful that the process is long enough to invite all the actors to have a say, because I don't think that for European legislation, which has the influence on big things, how the people live and what are the opportunities in the EU, I don't think that speed is a good advisor, and that speed is the good parameter for taking key decisions. The appetite to open the treaty, I am myself curious. If we do that, I have some very concrete proposals how to make Europe more and better to understand for the citizens. For instance, every month traveling to Strasbourg, it's something which should be considered.
Thank you. As the two prime ministers, perhaps in particular, to react on the question about the United States.
Me?
Yeah, sorry.
The initiative 3Cs was an important initiative regarding developing on the eastern flank of projects of infrastructure on transport, energy, and other kind of project. At the reunion organized in Bucharest, participated not only the American representative, but also, I remember, the President of European Commission, the representative of Germany. Is an initiative inside Europe. I saluted the statement of State Secretary regarding the involvement with $1 billion in this project. But of course, the countries which are part of initiative should participate, and we should realize a mechanism to use all these resources collected from the contribution of different states involved in this project and the United States. I think also that the European Union could participate to support some of the expenses.
Prime Minister Plenković.
On 2 points, very positive commitment. I think 3Cs initiative can help, and it's good to have the United States committed. On the question which was also raised, and that is the issue of the treaty change in the Conference on the Future of Europe. You know that the Croatian presidency has been mandated to unite the common position of the Council, and we are in the nitty-gritty final negotiations with the member states. This is one of the key issues. I think we should be smart enough and leave that possibility open and then see, because the treaty change is not the only elephant in the room. The biggest elephant in the room in the last political European year was how did we understand what do we imply by the Spitzencandidate and the ramifications of the results of the European elections. That should be something that is definitely part of the agenda of the conference to be clearly addressed, because in 2024, if we stay as we are now, I wonder who will have the courage to be the Spitzencandidate of any of the groups.
Annalena Baerbock. I go to you last, Prime Minister. Annalena Baerbock, Margaritis, Schinas.
Well, to the question, I agree what was said before. I think we need a two-track approach in this regard. I mean, 2 days we discussed on this conference, now we need a common European security and foreign policy. Obviously, this cannot work in unanimity. So in this field, we do have to do something, and I think we also have to talk about treaty changes. But, and this is a bit but from my side, I see that many hide between the treaty changes because everybody knows this won't start tomorrow. So I think the important thing also at the summit is not to say we cannot do anything by now, but we have to remember that we have many tools, you mentioned it, within the European treaties by themselves, enhanced cooperation, all the big integration projects like Schengen, like the Euro, they were done by this form of enhanced cooperation, and there are still some on the table from the French president, like investment into a Eurozone budget, also the question of common taxation, which has unanimity, which we should change. But as long as we don't do it, nobody hinders us from cooperation of having a common European digital tax, for example. And unluckily, my country is in these kind of fields not in the forefront. And my big danger is if we forget about this cooperation, which is possible, this goes to the first question, then something else happens. Others step in. And I can totally understand that those countries concerned, they are happy that there is investment from the US. But actually, I'm a bit afraid, and I think this should have been European investment from the EIB or via a Green New Deal, and that's why the budget is so important. We saw it in Greece. Because Europe didn't invest via a Eurozone budget, then the Chinese came into critical infrastructure. We have to be very carefully right now in Europe that in sensitive elements of our infrastructure, there is not so much foreign investment that the whole question about sovereignty is not there anymore, because inside Europe we opened many gates, and so I think this has to be actually a European point under the umbrella of the Green Deal, under the umbrella of the new budget of the European Union.
Margaritis, Schinas, and then we turn to Armin Laschet.
On the Three Seas initiative, I think we should welcome the American interest. Three Seas initiative is a European initiative. All these countries are part of our European transport and energy trans-European networks. So we have already an architecture which is European, and $1 billion is very much welcome. Simply to remind everybody that the European Union, through our cohesion and structural funds, spends about 50 billion in this area. Now, on the Conference of the Future of Europe, there is one risk that I was discussing with Elmar Brok and others yesterday, that the risk is that this conference is understood as something that means Brussels talks to Brussels. That would be wrong. Equally wrong would be who governs this. So in European politics for 30 years, no one ever discussed normal people, interinstitutional relations with me. Nobody really cares. Nobody cares. People care about issues. So if we trigger this process and it becomes a mechanics of experts and geeks, that won't work. And the treaty change debate, I think the reply is very simple here, that form should always follow function. I mean, if out of this we get something that needs to be reflected in a form, we'll do it. If not, we should not start with an objective of doing it without knowing what we want to go.
Herr Ministerpräsident.
Ja, das war ja eine schwierige Frage vom Kollegen von Corriere della Sera, dass eine Kritik an der Bundeskanzlerin war. Also als erstes hätte ich mir eine engagiertere Antwort auf Macron gewünscht. Schneller und auch durchaus im Diskurs mit ihm. Ich stimme nämlich dem Grundansatz zu, seinem Wahlkampf zu, wenn Populisten stark sind, wenn du vor der Gefahr stehst, dass potenziell Le Pen in Frankreich gewinnt, dann zu sagen, ich mache einen dezidiert europäischen Wahlkampf. Ich meide das Thema nicht, ich rede nicht ein bisschen ähnlich wie die, sondern ich mache das Gegenmodell und werbe für dieses Modell. Das war der Erfolg seines Wahlsiegs im Mai 2017. Und dann hat er die Sorbonne-Rede gehalten mit substanziell wichtigen Vorschlägen für Europa. Und darauf hätte er eine engagierte deutsche Antwort erwarten können. Der Aachener Vertrag ist ein Stück dieser Antwort, wo man in sehr kurzer Zeit sehr präzise beschrieben hat, wie denn Deutschland und Frankreich enger zusammenarbeiten sollen. Wo ich nicht seine Meinung teile, ist die institutionelle Frage rund um das Eurozonenbudget. Denn das ist sehr intergouvernemental gedacht, wie Frankreich immer denkt. Aber dieses Budget muss natürlich möglichst nah am Haushalt der Europäischen Union und an den europäischen Institutionen sein. Aber über eine solche Frage kann man einen Konsens hinkriegen. Insgesamt noch einmal entschuldigend für die derzeitige deutsche Regierung würde ich sagen, es waren die letzten Jahre auch von fundamentalen Krisen geprägt. Also erst die Weltfinanzkrise, dann die europäische Schuldenkrise, dann die Migrationskrise, dann der Konflikt zwischen Ukraine und Russland, wo Deutschland und Frankreich eine große Vermittlungsrolle übernommen haben. Dann der Brexit, der zu bewältigen ist. Und in dieser Zeit war vielleicht nicht die Zeit für große europäische Visionen. Ich glaube, die Zeit, die jetzt vor uns liegt, wird das wieder stärker brauchen. Und wenn man dann definiert hat, was man will, dann kommt auch die Frage der Vertragsveränderung mit hinzu. Und da stimme ich völlig überein. Wenn nötig, muss man auch das diskutieren. Wir wissen alle, wie schwierig das ist. Aber wenn man strukturell in diesem Reformprozess sagt, da und da brauchen wir Veränderungen, darf man auch eine Vertragsveränderung nicht scheuen.
We have 90 seconds left, and I go to the either-or round. You have one word, maximum one sentence. Now, Marcel Proust wrote one sentence with 865 words. If you're capable of this, be my guest. And it's really perhaps very simple. For you, Prime Minister, Schengen or the Eurozone? What's first?
Both.
I have the same question for you. What's first, Schengen or the Eurozone?
First Schengen and after Eurozone.
Very good. That's clarity. Widening or deepening? For you, Vice President, widening, enlargement, or deepening of the European?
Of course, enlargement.
Okay,
Widening. Of course.
Very good. Annalena Baerbock, opposition or government?
Eternal open.
Responsibility in both cases.
Simple one. And I ask it in German, but you will understand it. Düsseldorf oder Berlin?
Aachen.
Charlemagne.
Last one is open or closed?
Open, but aware.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you and let me thank the panel. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.